And I give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
السيد الرئيس.
Madam President, Syria, in the strongest terms, condemns and rejects any use of chemical weapons or any weapons of mass destruction as a crime against humanity that is rejected, immoral, and impossible to justify in any circumstance. The target of the use of such weapons is the Syrian people, the first victim to date of the crimes by armed terrorist groups that have not hesitated to use chemical weapons against it. Let me stress to this Security Council that we are keen as ever to uncover the real criminal responsible for the use of chemical weapons in Syria. Proceeding from such firm principles, my country joined the CWC, implemented all its commitments in accordance with said convention, and made unprecedented achievements in the history of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons by ending the Syrian chemical program in record time, irreversibly, as certified by the statement of the joint mission to rid Syria of chemical weapons to the Security Council in June of 2014. As I stated before this council this morning, my country, in the context of its continuing transparent cooperation with OPCW, did indeed dispatch a letter to the Director General of the organization calling on him to dispatch a neutral, fair, and professional mission to both Khan Sheikhoun and the Shuairat Air Base to find out exactly what happened comprehensively, transparently, and fairly. Syria stresses its preparedness to ensure access by the mission to the Shuairat Air Base in order to ascertain whether sarin had been or is stockpiled there or not. As for the town of Khan Sheikhoun, regrettably, I am forced to tell you that access there must be guaranteed by Jabhat al-Nusra, that terrorist group and other terrorist groups operating there, and perhaps through the governments of states that support that organization, that direct it on the ground, at the forefront of which are France, the UK, the US, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. My country is second to none in its interest to uncover the truth. In principle, we support any measure by the Security Council to reach such truth. However, we do object to draft resolutions that have very sly political language with prejudgment on the results of any investigation, that want the investigation to, in advance, accuse the Syrian government, just as stated just now by the UK and the US in the Security Council. The three Western states in the Security Council have become used to operating with similar language in previous draft resolutions so that they can be abused by these same states to justify intervention in the internal affairs of other countries and aggress them militarily, such as Libya and other states. Whoever reads today's resolution carefully would realize that the genuine, true objective is not to uncover the truth. It is to violate Syrian sovereignty, to abuse and use any information that can be collected through the draft resolution, had it been adopted, in order to target caters, sites, and capabilities of the Syrian government and army by those terrorist groups supported by the three countries and their proxies in the region, just as the chemical Godot was being looked for in Iraq. I have already informed Special Envoy Stefan de Mistura on 31 March in our talks in Geneva, provided him with early reports on the possession of armed terrorist organizations in rural Damascus, Idlib, and Hama of toxic chemical materials to be used against civilians. And let's recall that my country certainly didn't use chemical or nuclear weapons against Hiroshima, Nagasaki, or Vietnam, or Iraq. My country has not tested chemical nuclear weapons against living Algerians in the west of the African continent. As I was saying, on 31 March, I informed Special Envoy Stefan de Mistura during our talks in Geneva of early documented reports of the possession of armed terrorist groups in rural Damascus, Idlib, and Hama of toxic chemical materials to be used as a weapon against civilians. I also warned him that facts are being doctored, evidence fabricated against the Syrian government. I told this to Mr. de Mistura before Khan Sheikhoun, 5 days before. As I told you this morning, my government has addressed more than 90 letters, the latest only 1 day ago, to relevant UN bodies, including documented information on the possession by terrorist organizations with ISIL and Jabhat al-Nusra at the forefront of toxic chemical material, including sarin, that reach those groups from Libya through Turkish territory with full knowledge of Turkish authorities. The sponsors of the draft resolution today know full well that resolutions of the Security Council and OPCW since my country's accession to the CWC are the sufficient and appropriate international legal framework in this regard. I would call other member states in the Security Council to be logical and rational. Try to obtain clear responses to questions being posed on this incident, and look to the reactions of the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. I have a number of questions. All the video, all the pictures on the Khan Sheikhoun incident, all came from organizations claiming to work in the humanitarian field, when we know full well that they're directly linked to armed terrorist groups on the ground. I would like to speak specifically on a group calling itself the White Helmets that seems to have won the Oscar for Best Actor. We have informed you repeatedly. We have provided pictures, films, and documented evidence that members of that organization work under the direction of the UK intelligence services. One, have you read the report by Swedish Doctors for Human Rights that showed the duplicity of the so-called white helmets? Do you know that the British doctor Shagul Islam, who was with the armed terrorist groups on the ground in Khan Sheikhoun, the main witness in all the media campaigns against the Syrian government, that same doctor was imprisoned for 13 months in the United Kingdom under terrorist accusations, including the kidnapping of British journalists in Syria. A suspected terrorist now being used for these media campaigns. Furthermore, how can anyone claiming to seek the truth through international legitimacy claim the right to perpetrate an act of military aggression against a site that they claim was the source of aircraft that took off to strike Khan Sheikhoun with chemical weapons? please read the book called The Real Story of Benghazi, What the White House and Hillary Do Not Wish You to Know, by Aaron Klein, a book that details the coordination and mediation undertaken by the late U.S. ambassador in Libya, Chris Stevens, in operations to export weapons and indeed sarin from Libya to the states supporting terrorists in Syria. Furthermore, a report prepared today by Theodore Postel, a U.S. Scientist at MIT, evaluating claims from the White House on what allegedly took place in Khan Sheikhoun. He believes that the information that U.S. officials based their accusation against the Syrian government on is but a crater on the road in the north of Khan Sheikhoun. And then he says that all available information from that crater shows that the munition was on the ground and was not launched from the air, let alone the claims of my French colleague of events on 19th of August, or what the US ambassador might call the killing of hundreds of civilians in Khan Mansoura, for example. Mr. President, Madam President, sorry. My delegation stresses that it is continuing to implement all its commitments that we took on when acceding to CWC, as well as our war against terror, which will not stop regardless of any political blackmail or any media campaigns or any shedding of innocent Syrian blood. In conclusion, my delegation thanks and expresses appreciation to the Russian Federation and Bolivia that voted against the draft resolution. We thank those delegations that did abstain from voting in their conviction of the sinister objectives behind this draft resolution and based on the most basic principles of international law and the Charter, in their belief that such resolutions do affect the credibility of international action and its institutions and do threaten international peace and security. Thank you, Madam.
I acknowledge the statement of the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.